My last video, unsurprisingly, caused a bit of a stir. It was about how Paul Chambers plays the bass line on the classic Miles Davis track, So What? Most of the reaction has been positive, but some of it has not.
Who do you think you are? What gives you the right?
Well, that's to be expected, especially with that video's deliberately provocative title. I don't want to call it clickbait, but whatever you call it, if you want people to watch a video, the thumbnail and the title have to be crafted in a way to bait people to click on it. I have three main topics for this video, and I know I need to get to them fast because one is about what happens when you don't get to the point fast. So here are my topics. Clickbait, or the difficulty of making a nuanced argument in the YouTube format. Chord substitution, or the futility of debating music theory on the internet. Intuition versus evidence, or let's go to the tape. Part 1. Clickbait, or the difficulty of making a nuanced argument in the YouTube format. I worried that I was maybe leaning a bit too much into the clickbait approach when I came up with the title and definitely the thumbnail for the Paul Chambers video. It was intended to be a bit cheeky, but I know my sense of humor is too subtle for the internet. There's an inherent contradiction here. Coming up with a pithy message, provocative enough to get someone to click as they're quickly scrolling through dozens of similar loud thumbnails, asks for one kind of attention from the viewer. Building a carefully constructed argument that unfolds over 17 minutes asks for something completely different.
And now for something completely different.
Then there's the algorithm. What makes the algorithm suggest a video in the first place? Why does my Paul Chambers video have, as I record this, over 6,000 views, while the similarly nerdy Duke Ellington video I posted last month only has 150? Is it a knock-on effect from the Squire bass video just before it? Or is it because of an inflammatory versus anodyne title and thumbnail? Some people click through in bad faith. They're not actually interested in what I have to say, or even giving me the chance to say it. They just want to rip me a new one for the audacity of the first impression I made. To some extent, I probably have that coming. Clickbait sucks. And if you're predisposed to think I suck, I'm not going to be able to change your mind. But look, I've been using the internet since before the web existed. I know a troll when I see one, and sometimes I even remember not to feed them. As for the people who are willing to give me the benefit of the doubt, the things I say in the first minute or two might still erode that paper-thin layer of trust. Like, you might think the fact that I even mention the real book means I'm a tool, even though, literally in the next breath, I say that I spent time meticulously listening to and transcribing parts from the recordings. In fact, that's the whole reason I even noticed the bass notes in question, which is the entire point of the video. I've watched plenty of YouTube videos myself where I can't resist firing off an early comment, only to discover, as I keep watching, that the person in the video does address my point, and I shouldn't have just jumped on my first negative assumptions about them. There's no such thing as a perfectly succinct and comprehensive argument. Even across 17 minutes, I didn't come close to everything I needed to say. As I was editing the video, I thought of a couple of specific points I hadn't given proper attention in my initial script. I was so frustrated with myself that I actually walked away and almost considered scrapping the whole thing. Instead, I slept on it, and in the morning, I decided I'd adequately touched on the points I wanted to make. But as with literally everything in existence, there's more to the story. That leads me to the first of two specific points I want to add about So What, and also my next general topic for this video. Part 2, Chord Substitution, or the futility of debating music theory on the internet. While I was analyzing the walking bass line under Bill Evans' piano solo, I noticed that Paul Chambers was outlining not an E-flat minor 7 chord, but an A-flat 7. In the video, I mentioned Ron Carter's concept of the bassist changing the changes by substituting compatible chords on successive iterations of the form during solos, but I didn't talk about the nature of this specific substitution. It's significant because the mode generally associated with a dominant 7 chord like this is mixolydian. And A-flat mixolydian consists of exactly the same notes as E-flat Dorian. In other words, the bassist can outline A-flat mixolydian even if the soloist continues in E-flat Dorian, and it just works. there's something else interesting about this particular substitution and what it suggests about how Paul Chambers was approaching So What. Combining both these new modal jazz concepts with more established traditional aspects of jazz harmony, and in the process, obliterating any doubt I might have about the three-dimensional music theory chess he's playing here. These are both modes of the D-flat major scale, which is a tritone away from A. A is the 5 or dominant chord of D. Tritone substitution of the dominant was already a staple of jazz harmony in the 1950s, so it makes sense to employ that here. On top of that, by picking A-flat 7 as the substitute chord, we're also a tritone away from the root, D, of the A section of the chart. So weirdly, it's almost like a tritone substitution of both the dominant and the tonic, while exploring new modal possibilities, depending on how you look at it.
So what I told you was true, from a certain point of view.
A certain point of view?
By this point, I think the functional relationship between these chords is getting a bit fuzzy, though, in terms of finding a way to have A-flat 7 resolve to D minor 7, but it's still an interesting way to add more harmonic color to what's going on. And that was definitely part of the assignment for this album. Wait, what did I just say? I think? That's where I get to my broader point here. I've known for years that it is utter futility to debate music theory on the internet. There might not be any field of human endeavor that's a better example of the Dunning-Kruger effect in action than music theory. Do I know what I'm talking about regarding music theory? Yes, and no. Music theory is an extremely broad and open-ended field of study. I know there are things I know. I know there are things I don't know. I know there are probably things I don't know I don't know.
There are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns, the ones we don't know we don't know.
I was a music major in college in the 1990s. That gave me 2 years of formal music theory training, even though we spent far too much of that time on 4-part voice leading, and jazz theory was just a 2-page appendix in the second-year textbook. Later, I butted heads with our classically focused department chair and focused on jazz anyway. I did my senior honors thesis on the evolution of John Coltrane's avant-garde style in the 1960s. I also played first tenor sax in the top jazz band for 3 of my 4 years, so I did manage to learn something about improvising over changes along the way. But despite my degree, I didn't go on to be a professional musician. I can't play 100 jazz standards from memory in all 12 keys or rip through the rhythm changes at 300 BPM. I never stopped making music though, and I've continued to study jazz theory on my own informally. But I'm not going to pretend I know everything.
Not even close.
My goal in these videos is to stick to the things I definitely do know that I know. But that's where Dunning-Kruger comes in. It seems like everyone on the internet thinks they know more about music theory than anyone else they're interacting with. Some of them obviously do, but chances are, a lot of the time, they don't. And yes, that probably includes me. The thing is, even if you don't know something in advance, you can learn by observation. That's the essence of jazz from the very beginning. We're always told that the best way to learn jazz is by listening to it. Actively, intentionally listening. And that brings me to Part 3, Intuition versus Evidence, or let's go to the tape. I don't want to pick on anyone who commented on my last video because this isn't about proving anyone wrong. I just want to reference a couple of them to help illustrate a point. A few comments initially seemed to make a lot of sense, but then I realized they just didn't jibe with what's on the recording. For example, one commenter suggested that perhaps the D naturals were taking advantage of the open D string. It's a good idea, but the D naturals in question are an octave higher. It's really easy to take an idea and run with it in a way that seems perfectly reasonable and internally consistent, but overlooks readily available evidence. And I kind of did that myself when I prepared the previous video. It was mostly a matter of time constraints. I had already written a lengthy script, recorded and edited it, and only then did the stunningly obvious finally dawn on me. If I want to understand Paul Chambers' intent, I need to analyze the live TV performance. You know, the one that I showed clips of in my video, also from 1959, and see what he played there. So I extracted the audio from that video, and just to be sure I was hearing all of the details clearly, I ran it through Logic's stem splitter, then turned on flex pitch on the track, so I could not only hear, but see exactly what the notes were. Before we look at that, I want to get really specific about the timeline because I think it matters. Was this TV special taped before or after the So What studio recording session? Kind of Blue was recorded in 2 sessions. So What was part of the first session on March 2nd, 1959. The Miles Davis website says the TV special was recorded on April 2nd, 1959, and broadcast on July 21st, 1960. Consider Bill Evans' liner notes from the album about Miles bringing sketches to the studio with no prior rehearsals. I think it's safe to assume that the March 2nd session was the first time Paul Chambers had ever played So What. There was, most likely, at least one subsequent rehearsal to prepare for the April 2nd TV gig, especially since the tune was now arranged for the larger horn section that joins near the end. Okay then, 1 month after recording the album version, how did Paul Chambers play it live? Let's go to the tape. As you can see, there's still a fair bit of pitch inconsistency, but he's definitely playing a D flat, at least the first 2 times. The third time does sound like a D natural, and that's what Logic thinks it is, but it's more of a ghost note. Still, the first 2 are definitely D flats. That's at the top. What does he do in the return to the head? Well, it's D naturals here, although the second one is a bit flat. You can also see in the video, he's shifting the bass around on the floor as he plays. I think that's significant because it shows how players in a real performance setting need to make adjustments on the fly. This is not a precision-engineered machine. It's a group of humans reacting to the moment. Should I talk about tuning systems now? Do I have to? I guess I have to, at least to prove I know it's a thing. Part 3.5. Talking about tuning systems, at least to prove I know it's a thing. Another commenter suggested maybe Paul Chambers was playing the septimal minor 7th. Before I get into what that interval is, a little background. Equal temperament, the modern tuning system used in most, definitely not all, Western music, was invented for keyboard instruments in the 18th century to be able to play in all 12 keys. It's the sound we're used to now, but all of the intervals besides the octave are slightly out of tune. Some, like thirds and sixths, are more than slightly out of tune. Even the octaves are slightly out of tune on a piano because of compensations piano tuners make for the way higher overtones drift sharp relative to their pure ratios. Before equal temperament, there were a variety of different tuning systems designed as ways of approaching the pure mathematical intervals our ears want to hear between the notes, but that introduce horrible intonation inconsistencies when you try to change keys. That set of simple mathematical intervals is called just intonation. Stringed instruments without frets don't have to play an equal temperament. In fact, most orchestral players will make small, subtle adjustments to blend their note with the current chord. It's not even necessarily a conscious choice. It just happens innately as you develop facility on an instrument and an ear for playing in tune. But that's really only relevant when the player is holding the note long enough to make those kinds of adjustments. A jazz bassist playing pizzicato and running their hand up the length of a very long fingerboard is not a robot. No matter how great their muscle memory, they're not always going to land perfectly on the note. Some jazz bassists are better than others at that muscle memory thing. Ron Carter, for example, can absolutely lock in those pitches. Paul Chambers was incredibly talented with great feel and creative harmonic approaches, but that kind of perfect, locked-in intonation just was not one of his strengths. Comparing the isolated bass track of So What to Ron Carter's line on Little One makes that clear. Back to the septimal minor 7th. I'll admit that while I've heard of this before, I had to look it up to remember the specifics. The septimal minor, or harmonic 7th, is a 7:4 ratio. That's an even smaller, i.e. flatter, ratio than the 16:9 just temperament minor 7th, which itself is about 4 cents flat to an equal temperament minor 7th. Again, it's an interesting idea, but it's not what's on the tape. Conclusion. Just play what sounds good to your ear, but make sure you understand what you're hearing. This is where I think a few people missed my point in the last video, probably because A, I didn't state it clearly, and B, I took forever to get to it, like I've just done again. Suggesting that what Paul Chambers played on So What was quote-unquote wrong was a provocative exaggeration. Questioning whether or not it was intentional, I think, was valid, but it still kind of misses the point. Rules are made to be broken, even if they're Miles Davis's rules. The tunes on Kind of Blue started as sketches, rough templates Miles brought to the sessions for this elite group of musicians to flesh out in the ways that made sense to them. Here's the point. The only reason any of this matters to me in the first place is that I'm going to be playing this chart soon, and I want to play it in the way that sounds and feels right to me. And to do that, I need to understand what's going on in the original recording. With this video footage, we can also see where on the neck Paul Chambers is playing the line. That's not at all where I'm playing it, because aside from the fact that I'm playing electric bass, not upright, it just doesn't flow right for me to play solely on the D and A strings with a lot of fast position changes. So I'm doing it my own way, in a single hand position across all 4 strings. Since I also have the precision of frets, that's the whole reason Leo Fender called it the precision bass after all, I'm not dealing with the fluidity of pitch that Paul Chambers had. I have to decide if I'm going to play a D flat or a D natural, not something in between. However you hear it and however you play it is up to you as the listener or player. But if you want those decisions to be as intentional and informed as possible, the best way to do that is to look at all of the available evidence. That's the great irony of the internet. When I was in college in the mid-1990s, I had no way to access a copy of this 1959 TV performance. I didn't even know it existed. I had my CD of Kind of Blue, and I had a computer. But tools like stem splitters and flex pitch didn't exist. There wasn't even a way to rip the CD onto the computer. Fast forward to 2025. This TV clip has been readily available on YouTube for 14 years. Not only do I have access to it, but I carry a tiny computer around in my pocket that allows me to access it anytime, anywhere. Thanks to the internet and smartphones, there's never been a time in human history when it was easier to access just about any imaginable piece of information. And yet, it seems like there's also never been a time when we were so quick to make assumptions, jump to conclusions, and shut down critical thinking without examining the evidence at our fingertips. Critical thinking doesn't mean being critical in the negative sense. It means examining evidence closely with an open mind, engaging ideas earnestly, and only with the knowledge gleaned from that effort coming to a decision about what you think is correct, recognizing that your original assumptions may have been wrong. I appreciate most of the comments I received on my last video. There were some really insightful ideas about what might be going on in this recording, and they helped me to think more creatively about what I might do myself when playing So What at our gig in October. Now, the fact that it took me so long to get to the point, again, means I've probably lost most of the people that I wanted to hear it. I can't just transfer my thoughts instantly into your brain. We're not living in the Matrix, yet. Anyway, you know the drill. Like, subscribe, check the description for links to other ways you can support the channel. And I do mean this sincerely. If you made it this far, thanks for watching.